Welcome to the Susan Brender Show. It's all about you. Featuring shows on health and wellness, the performing arts, politics, and people who inspire you to be your very best. And now, here's Susan Brender.
I'm Susan Brender, and this is the Susan Brender Show. Now, today I have a guest by the name of Robert Gaglio, and he's a very interesting guy. Now, after a 28-year career in banking and wealth management, Robert pursued his passion for Italian cooking and his culture by creating Italian Culinary Tours, a specialty travel company that creates unique culinary tours in the diverse regions of Italy. Now, over the years, Chef Robert has traveled the various places and regions in Italy to discover true Italian cooking, and he's researched the rich culinary history of Italy. I want to welcome to my show Robert Gaglio.
Hi. Thank you very much for having me on your show.
Well, it's my pleasure. Now, let's start from the beginning. Now, it's very interesting that you are doing what you do after a career in banking, and now you're doing Italian culinary tours. How did that happen? I mean, they're so different.
Well, they're different in some ways, but in some ways I look back after 3 years and find that it's not so different. Certainly from using your brain as far as financially with ledgers and accounts and things like that with banking, that's quite different. But interacting with your guests, when I was a bank, that was a client. They're very similar people, similar as far as the target market, and it's really been just a switch from providing banking clients with all the financial experts that they need at that level. It's similar in today now in travel. I provide all the experts they need to have a most amazing experience in Italy. So, yeah, very interesting. How did I get to that point?
Yeah.
I guess I had an epiphany. And that epiphany combined with a long interest in Italian cuisine. I bought my first pasta maker when I was 17 after watching my best friend's dad in the basement make fresh pasta. So along the years, I've had a big interest in cooking. And in the last 10 years, studying Italian cooking, the different regions, and really understanding it. I would read a lot of historical books, not just cookbooks, but historical books on the origins. But that epiphany was when I visited my grandfather's birthplace in Montelebre, Sicily, and really started the interest.
Now, Robert, there are so many people who have seen the movie that is about Tuscany, and it turned them on to the food. Now, why Italy? Because French cooking is supposed to be one of the most marvelous. Now, you decided on Italian. Now, there are so many different ethnic kinds of cooking and recipes. Why Italian? What is it about Italian that really turns you on?
Well, first and foremost, it's very personal to me. My mother was born in a small town outside of Messina, Sicily. And my father's parents were born outside of Palermo. So it's very personal. It's what I grew up with. It's my culture. And it's interesting that you say French cuisine. Locally, I do dinner theater in people's homes. And I do a dinner based on a book, How Italian Food Conquered the World. John Marinardi is the author. He's a longtime food critic and a author, and he really thinks he might beg to differ on the classification of French over Italian through a series of events that happen over 100 years around the world. Yeah, so that's kind of the interest, and that's why. And I love the fact that Italy is made up of 20 different regions, And we in America have a total misconception as to what Italian food is.
Well, wait a minute. Let's talk about that misconception. You know, when I think about Italian food, I think about, of course, pizza. You know, that's one of the things.
Sure.
Spaghetti and meatballs. I think about different kinds of food dishes with red sauce. And if you come from the northern region, I think about wine. So this is a little bit of apples and oranges. Isn't it a chemistry that you have to know to create really fabulous food?
Not from what I experienced cooking in Italy, because you start with the most fresh and wonderful ingredients. This type of cooking is very simple. It's not complicated. In fact, I like to present dishes that are recipes from many years ago, and it's really starting with fresh ingredients that is the most important thing in Italian cooking.
Yeah. Now, let's talk about health, because health is a really big issue all over the world right now. We have obese people with diabetes, people with sugar problems. You name it, they've got it.
Gluten is an issue too.
Okay, talk about gluten and also.
Sure, and to be fair, I'm not a nutrition expert, but I can just share with you some of the things I've read, and maybe that might be helpful. Getting back to the book about why did Italian food become so popular, it's interesting that you bring in the health component. Initially, he starts out with this huge migration from Italy. It's the largest movement of people that has ever happened and ever will be in the future, back at the turn of the century. You have millions of Italians from mostly the South traveling all over the world, but predominantly coming to the United States and South America. So that group of people, they did not go to restaurants. There really weren't many restaurants in Italy at that time, in 1890, 1910. So these people came in the country, and slowly through the years, they started to create restaurants. And they basically moved their cooking from home into the restaurant setting, which is much different than, the French cuisine that came down from the French courts and things like that through the years. Which French cooking did have a long-staying dominance on the culinary world. So then you fast forward, you have a world war with all these GIs going through Italy, coming back home saying they had this amazing food. Then keep going, you have Hollywood pumping out movies like Under the Tuscan Sun, like The Godfather, showing the culture of these Italians over there and here with their food and family.
Right.
Then you have the fashion industry. Used to be Paris was the center of fashion. Today, it's really Milan. Milano is arguably the fashion capital of the world. And if you even look at sports cars, there is no car company that can compete with the style of Italian cars. So it's a that goes on. Now, you bring up the nutrition.
Right.
Well, in the 50s, there was a chap that was a scientist and also a doctor, and he wanted to know why people in Greece were living so long. And he looked at their diet, and he saw the Greeks are probably in the world, or they consume the most olive oil of any population, nationality in the world.
Right.
Not only are they consuming the most, but they're consuming the real deal. It's not just consuming olive oil. It's consuming olive oil that is first pressed, that's handled properly, and crushed to get the oil immediately as soon as it's picked. So that's where all the nutritional value is in olive oil. In fact,
let me stop you, Robert, because when you go to different stores, supermarkets, virtually any kind of store, you see all kinds of olive oils. Some of them are pretty expensive, and some of them are cheap. Now, is there a reason for that? And what would you recommend that people buy as far as olive oil is concerned?
Sure. Here's the deal. In the EU, the most counterfeited product, agricultural product that is out there is olive oil in the whole EU. And the United States only requires to let the consumer know the origins of the country that the olives came from. Okay? So that's all they're telling you. That's all they need to show you. The problem is when you go to a large box vendors or store, retail store that sells these, 2 jugs for, $20, 2 large gallons, you look on the back of the label and you see the country of origin, and you will see probably 5 different initials, two-letter initials denoting whether it's Turkey, Greece, Africa, the different countries, Spain. You don't really know what you're getting, and you don't know how it was handled and what's, how much time that's been on the shelf, because olive oil actually is not an oil. Olive oil is a food. Okay?
It's a food, you said?
It's a food. It's like grape juice, or you crush the fruit and you get a juice. We call it olive oil because it is a fat, but it's not refined. Oils come from seeds and nuts that are refined. If you refine olive oil, you're basically taking, what they do is they take bad olives, they take, maybe rancid olives and other bad products, and refine it using heat and chemicals and other ways, which removes the smell and taste. So that's the other issue you have. You have counterfeiting going on. Seed oil added to olive oil. You have poor quality olives being cleansed through the refining process and mixed with maybe some decent oil. So you're really only buying 25% good oil, and the rest is this other basically tasteless and odorless product.
Yeah, we should.
So what do you do? What do you do with all the counterfeiting going on? What do you do with the lack of labeling, the lack of understanding? If I buy an olive oil that's from Tuscany, say it says Tuscan olive oil, there's a good chance that those olives came from Puglia, which is one of the best areas in Italy to grow olives. And they were shipped and maybe processed, or they're just labeled Tuscany. Because remember, they only have to say what is the country origin of the product.
Right.
So that doesn't necessarily mean it was from this beautiful vineyard, olive grove where you see the hills and all that from Tuscany. It could be very much a different story. Now, what do we do as consumers to protect ourselves and get the best product? Because the health, getting back to the doctor who was researching, he found that these Greeks consume a lot of real olive oil, and they also have a diet with, vegetables, fruits. This is now back in the 50s, and understanding they had very little protein that came from animal meat, that sort of thing. So find yourself a good, reputable dealer in olive oil. There's lots of them now that are popping in, areas where, yes, it's going to cost you more per bottle, but you'll use less because there's much more flavor. It's better to cook with because it's a more stable cooking fat. And like we have a farmer's market here in Sarasota. There's a couple that she's from Puglia and has been bringing her family's olive oil into the country for 15 years.
Right.
So that's the relationship I have with that vendor, and I'm sure in your town, wherever you live, there's someone that's bringing in real good product that you can trust.
Okay, now, Robert, set the stage for us. So you are part of an event, and you're cooking for a lot of people at this event. How does it work? Okay, because I want people in our audience to understand how difficult it is, and also how one creates a meal for a large group in an event. Sure.
And to be fair, it may say chef here and there on my website or my information or articles that are written about me. I am basically the hard knocks kind of come up. I have a degree in finance. I had a long banking career. My cooking degree basically, I would say, is unofficial, and it's basically from spending many months with my family in Sicily, asking, "Hey Vita, how do you make arancini? Hey, how do you make caponata?" That's my cooking school. So technically, I'm not a culinary chef. So I always say I'm a performer who cooks. And what that means is I like to share the culture, the history of the food. So how did this dish come about? What is the custom that's around it? There's a dish called Easter pie, which is sort of like a quiche and a spinach pie combined with eggs in it. It's layered with filo dough on the bottom and top, and there's a ricotta cheese in the center with Parmesan, and on the bottom there's a layer of fresh asparagus, fresh artichoke, and spinach. So those are things that come in the spring, the artichoke in the north, Italy. So it's springtime, so they serve that dish for dinner. I forgot to say, you kind of poke little holes or make little holes inside the cheese before you put the lid on the pie, and you drop 6 eggs in the center of this pie. So
now, hold on, Robert. Are you doing this on purpose? Because I'm salivating just listening to you. Okay.
Well, it's amazing because it goes in the oven, and of course, filo dough is like, if you don't know what it is, you'll see them baklava or other pastry dishes.
Sure.
The Greeks use it, and Middle Eastern. So what happens is you stick this in the oven, and the ricotta cheese really starts. If it's really good quality stuff, it'll start ballooning, like getting real puffy. And then the egg, it's not like a hard-boiled egg. It's a real flaky, because it's just sitting there in the center, and it becomes baked. The egg is baked, and when you pull it out, the top is all crispy, and the cheese is amazing, and you have an egg, and makes a great morning dish here in America. But it's actually used for Easter dinner to kind of celebrate the artichokes coming in the spring. So that's the kind of thing, when I do a dinner, I like to share the stories of the dishes, and I really just do historical, traditional dishes. I don't have a fancy, culinary flair and all the stuff that's on TV, which is all great, but my goal is really to try to educate and bring in the cultural aspect of the food.
Yeah.
So getting back to the how do you do a large group, I tend to do, smaller, intimate dinners that are in people's homes. I bring a singer. She sings opera, some movie themes. We call it an event. It's really not a catered situation. It's a sit-down dinner, multiple courses, and we tell stories from John's book, How Italian Food Conquered the World, to kind of, teach people of, how this Italian food became so popular. Because you mentioned French cuisine.
Right.
In 1968, The Joy of Cooking came out, and Julia Childs was she became so famous because she was one of the pioneers doing this on television. And if you look at that book, olive oil is not used at all.
Wow. So what is
amazing?
Butter, tons of butter.
Yeah, there's 6 ingredients in French cooking, and it's butter, and cream, right? It's I joke because that's what it is, and that's not that that's a bad thing. Sicilians use a lot of cream and in dishes and things. It's just that's just French cooking was what happened. Getting back to our study on. Back in the 50s, in the 70s, they started to call this the Mediterranean diet. And
now you're leading to something that I think is very important, because people know about this Mediterranean diet and they think it's one of the best diets. Do you agree?
Here again, I'm not a nutritional expert. I'm 54 years old. I weigh the least I've ever weighed in my adult life. right now. I eat olive oil. I eat fruits and vegetables. I don't consume a lot of meat, although I had a hamburger last night. You know, I don't deprive myself. But I can't speak for other people. But for me, I think it just makes sense. When you start with ingredients that are what it is, you know, carrots, celery, lettuce, tomato, and it doesn't come out of a box in a jar, you know, that Mediterranean diet, and the big component is olive oil. I consume a lot of olive oil. I make my own dressing. I can't tell you the last time I bought a bottle of dressing off the shelf.
Right.
You know, how long has it been sitting there? What kind of preservatives are in it? That sort of thing. You know, and the Mediterranean diet, whatever, you know, to me, what it is, it's important to have fresh ingredients in olive oil as your fat, and fish is big. I eat a lot of fish. I'm blessed. Like you and I live in Florida. Most of the country does not have fresh fish.
Right.
We are blessed because we're right here on the Gulf of Mexico. I can get red snapper, lane snapper, grouper. 95% of all wild-caught fish in the United States is sent to Japan. Right. Because they pay the top for it. So here, this Mediterranean diet, I think is, you know, it basically in the 70s and 80s, it turned our thinking of food and nutrition upside down. Because before that, you know, you ate a lot more meat and less fruits and vegetables, and now it's like, okay, we really need to eat more of those and less of the protein.
Yes. Now, Robert, we have to leave our audience with a information about you and how they get in touch with you and what you're doing now and what you want to do.
Sure.
So first of all, I'd like to find out what's in the future for you. Are you going to be doing anything that is different from what you're doing now?
Well, pretty much my business is bringing people to Italy. We go to Tuscany every September. We have 7-night stays, so people come in on Saturday and they leave on Saturday. It's unpack your bag once. We handle everything from picking you up at the airport or your hotel or train station to handling your daily traffic, you know, your transportation. We have a chef on staff, full domestic help, so you don't pick up a dish while you're in your villa. So we're like a full-service resort, all-inclusive resort, but you're actually in a villa with no more than 8 people. And
wow.
It's quite marvelous, actually. And then we also, what's new, if you want to ask what's new, you know, it's funny how you have this epiphany, you totally change, you know, you change your life because your kids are, you know, out of college, and you start thinking, okay, what do I want to do the next 20 years of my life?
Right.
And I made that change. I certainly have a different, you know, starting a business from scratch. It's not the same kind of opportunities financially as a banking career, but emotionally, it's a marvelous opportunity. And I met a match. I met someone who is really amazing to me, and she's a spiritual counselor. So the two of us got to thinking after 2 years of touring Italy together. We got to thinking, hey, why don't we combine our both passions into one? So we have a spiritual tour of Sicily happening in October. So we will go to, most people don't realize Sicily, at the peak of the Greek Empire, had more Greeks living there than in Greece.
Yes. And
the temples there are larger in size, and they're more plentiful in Sicily than they are Greece. So we'll be going to some of these beautiful sites, not only the Greeks, but the Muslims, the Byzantine, the Romans. We'll be seeing these sites and doing some meditation and yoga and things like that. So it's been a wonderful thing. You change your life, and then you meet your partner. So
perfect.
I just feel very, very happy about that.
And
then locally, I do these dinner kind of pop-up dinners and little events. I do charity events where we'll donate the dinner for a charity, and that sort of thing. So it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, sounds great. Now, if people want to get in touch with you, you have a website and...
I do, yeah. Our website is italianculinarytours.com, and there's Facebook. You just search Italian Culinary Tours, and I should pop up, and you can kind of see some of the fun stuff we do. And then the website has lots of pictures, testimonials, and it's very limited. Small groups, 8 people. It's very special. I have very well-traveled people with me, and we get lots of. For me to be, for me now, my compensation is when someone says to me, "Hey, I went home after your talk or your class, and I made a Sicilian dish. I was so inspired." Or a mom will post on Facebook her daughter and her, for the first time on their own, making pasta and stating, "Thank you, Robert, for teaching my daughter at the farmer's market this wonderful skill." To me, that's I can't put a dollar amount on that bonus.
Sure not. Today my guest has been Robert Gaglio, and he's a very interesting guy who is doing amazing things. And people ought to take a look at his website and see what you can join. I mean, there are so many things that he is inviting people to do with him. So I say thank you, Robert, for being on the Susan Brender Show. It's been a pleasure.
Well, Susan, it's been my pleasure as well, and thank you. Grazie.
Grazie to you.
Thank you for listening to the Susan Brender Show. To be a guest, email sebrender@yahoo.com.